welcome to the It's All Greek to Me blog tour. I'm Dr. Paul Kiritsis and this is blog number 3. Today I'll be discussing the appearance of the Greek gods and goddesses on the fresco The Apotheosis of Washington, painted on the oculus of the dome in the rotunda of the United States Capitol building by Greek-Italian artist Constantino Brumidi in the year 1865. For a country which is predominantly Christian in its religious sentiments, the United States Capitol exhibits many architectural features and aesthetic depictions that Protestant fundamentalists would gladly denounce as heretical and pagan. I vividly remember visiting the city in August of 2005 and being pleasantly delighted by the pagan overtones so fearlessly expressed by symbols either imagined or real. Pentagrams, obelisks, mausoleums, Doric and Ionic columns, temples, astrological zodiacs, and so forth. Even one of the holiest areas in Washington D.C, the oculus of the dome inside the rotunda of the United States Capitol building, is peppered with pagan imagery in the form of 7 Greek gods and goddesses. All appear to be going through the motions of conferring requisite knowledge upon the Americans to be used in defeating the British Army and acquiring the necessary increments in consciousness to catapult them to the head of the international stage. But why should intellect and wisdom be conferred upon the Americans by Greek deities? Why should Greek deities surround George Washington at the moment of his apotheosis, his moment of becoming a god? Why isn't the preference given to Yahweh, Jesus Christ, or some other deity more closely related to the Judeo-Christian tradition? The answer to this question lies entrenched in the religious and spiritual allegiance of America's founding fathers, men who endorsed the Declaration of Independence. 15 of the 56 who signed were Freemasons, including the likes of Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. The latter two served as second and third presidents, respectively. George Washington, the man who led the Continental Army to victory, signed the Constitution and took up the mantle of the presidency, was also a Freemason. His allegiance to and identification with its fundamental principles cannot be questioned. For what man would lay the cornerstone of the US Capitol decked in ceremonial regalia, want to enact the rituals of an esoteric brotherhood whose philosophical flavouring he really didn't believe in? None really. The Freemasons are an interesting bunch. Much has been said about the esoteric brotherhood, most of it unflattering and false. Its affiliates and members have been openly criticised, harassed and ridiculed over the years, and conspiracy theories have been ample. What haven't we heard about Freemasons? Some allegations are as far removed from reality, so ridiculously laughable, that they're hardly worth mentioning at all. They've been everything from political factions that manipulate the world economy through its far-reaching underground connections with the mafia, organisations that monopolise banks and tamper with currencies, and cults that have conspired with Satan and his minions in pulling the wool over mortal eyes and driving humanity to sin and depredation. The latter of these is a Christian fabrication, fueled by the veil of secrecy with which the Freemasons conduct their periodic meetings, rituals and rites. Fundamentalist streams of the Christian faith have fed public fear and superstition by pursuing an appropriation of reality hinged on the logic that nothing is ever done without purpose. And therefore, there must be a reason why secrecy pervades the brotherhood. Lamentably, the tendency to keep things from others garners a breeding ground for ignorance, and the projection of fear that comes as a consequence of this mental instability adds to the growing momentum of outrageous superstition. This avenue of thinking usually leads to feelings of unrest and persecution, especially among the religiously inclined, and an unconscious reaction to such might be to resort to biblical scriptures, example Revelation 2:9, which speaks of blasphemy enacted by the synagogue of Satan. But nothing could be further from the truth. The secrecy pertaining to what goes on inside Masonic lodges has nothing to do with Satan, and all to do with keeping with a long-standing esoteric tradition which extends back to the sacred mystery schools of late antiquity. At such schools, students deemed worthy to receive knowledge relating to the true nature of reality had to take solemn oaths never to disclose the secrets to the general public. Those that did were brutally punished, tortured and killed even. When Alexandria grew to become the intellectual centre of the ancient world in the 3rd century BCE, these schools were flourishing. The mysteries of Artemis at Ephesus, the Eleusinian mysteries of the Great Mother and her daughter at Eleusis, and the mysteries of Isis and Osiris in Egypt were all schools of this type. At all times, Freemasons have believed themselves to be inheritors of these ancient traditions, particularly those that evolved out of Egypt. In this light, the veil of secrecy permeating Freemasonry can be attributed to the Egypto-Pythagorean ideal of not flashing your pearls before swine. And why didn't they want to flash them? To answer this question, we must take a brief look at the history of Freemasonry. The first Masonic document, the Old Charges, appeared in the 14th century and localizes Masonic heritage to a patriarchal line of fathers that include the primordial Jabal, the post-antediluvian figure of Hermes Trismegistus, Nimrod, Abraham Euclid, and the significant 80,000 others that built Solomon's temple. The inclusion of the Egyptian Hermes is significant, for it implies an intimate connection and identification with the philosophy and religious outlook of the Hermetic discipline. But before we rush to any conclusions regarding Masonic preservation of ancient Egyptian esoteric wisdom, we must take a hard, long look at the facts. Freemasonry claims lineage from Egypt and Israel, but is most likely evolved from medieval stonemasons' guilds, an operative craft which became increasingly speculative and esoteric after mingling with Knights Templars who had escaped execution and torture at the hands of the Roman Catholic Church. The Templars posed a threat because they retained knowledge of metaphysical and occult ideas about the cosmos that rendered defunct the Church's self-proclaimed right to rule the world. Rights that were hinged entirely on the shameless appropriation of biblical scriptures and exclusive monopolization of religious truth. Thus, it was only a matter of time before they were persecuted. That fateful moment was to occur at the end of the 13th century. Those lucky to escape the massacre took refuge in Scotland, the country in which Freemasonry originated. Many scholars believed that social intercourse between the two groups led to a transition of knowledge that refashioned the latter into an esoteric current, and that the knowledge that was passed down was quintessentially Hermetic in nature. I too am in complete harmony with their opinion. Occult Hermeticism was never a powerful religious current in itself, but its pseudo-epigraphical writings often informed and complemented Jewish chariot mysticism and the Gnostic currents of Christianity that were flourishing in the 1st and 2nd centuries in the Common Era. The Hermetic writings themselves allude to a golden age which was lost when man was cast out of the heavens, the eternal, unchanging realm of being, described by Plato as the noetic cosmos. Before he became subject to the shackles of mortality and time, man stood beside God as his brother, his other half, his equal. This is made clear in the first chapter of the Hermetica called Poimandres, which clearly states that man was co-equal to himself, with whom he fell in love. And what exactly was man before he fell from the Mount of Heaven and lost his throne beside his God brother? He was definitely a lot more than what he's being reduced to today. A very long time ago, humans were well acquainted with a way of knowing that precluded use of the 5 senses. This 6th sense, if you like, resided in the right hemisphere of the brain and appropriated the unconscious mind to enact what people of the modern world would perceive to be godlike feats. For example, extrasensory perception, psychokinesis, telepathy, projection to other times and places. This is definitely my idea of what being God's brother would be all about. They even encompass the requisite knowledge regarding the potentiality of consciousness to survive bodily death, an idea as ancient as our coming to consciousness. The Egyptian mystery schools all carried some form of antediluvian knowledge, though it was largely inaccessible to most and was kept well hidden away from the eyes of the profane. The best example of magical godlike feats made possible by this 6th sense that I can think of comes from the practices of the indigenous cultures of the Americas, the Pacific and the Africas. Their witch doctors or shamans possessed what many have termed jungle sensitiveness, an ability to communicate telepathically by entering trance states. The Montagnous Indians of eastern Canada are known for their ability to locate people via this method, as are the Hawaiian kahunas, for their equally impressive ability in accumulating enough psychic energy through meditative practice to call a whole pod of dolphins to the shore. I suppose they do this via a self-induced active form of lucid dreaming. Scientific study of paranormal phenomena also supports the notion that the unconscious mind, enthroned within the right hemisphere of the brain, can, on a great many occasions manifest powers deemed magical by the contemporary West. It comes from a kind of turning inward, as the unconscious or subjective force does encompass an existence that precludes the 5 physical senses and somehow attracts to itself energy fields that the conscious personality alone is completely and utterly unaware of. In addition, the energies can be drawn on the condition that there is a complete abeyance of the 5 physical senses. The Hawaiian kahunas, for example, believe that the psyche is divided into 3 distinct bodies or entities, one of which has direct access to the multidimensional matrix, which allows for extrasensory perception. If the Freemasons have inherited this Hermetic vision, then it should be no surprise that in order to become a Freemason, you must submit to 2 beliefs: the existence of a divine being, which can remain nameless, and the reality of life after death. Naturally, the Freemasons don't ever name the Godhead. There are 2 reasons for this. The first is a sign of respect to its members who come from different religious denominations, and secondly, as a sincere expression of respect towards divinity, which in all its glory and majesty cannot be localized. The Masonic enterprise believes in an experience of reality that is much, much closer to those perceived by the mystics and metaphysicians of ancient Greece, to Pythagorean music of the spheres, to the metaphysical doctrines of Plato, the vibrational unities of Heraclitus, and Democritus's primitive multiverse theory. These were all experiences of reality in which the fundamental unity of the entire world was pervaded by force fields of different vibrational wavelengths, and the force fields, which were the Greek gods and goddesses themselves, all emanated from the same basic substance and expressed themselves either consciously or unconsciously through human beings. When it comes to occult philosophy, we'll be discussing that in a lot more detail in some of my later blogs. Hence, when Freemason George Washington makes his appearance beside the Greek gods and goddesses on the dome of the US Capitol building, we can be more than certain that he's jovial and content, for the man finds himself amongst powerful forces that he believed in, was possessed by, and found meaning in during times good and bad, time and time again. I'm going to conclude today's blog with a poem I've written about the fresco in question, also titled The Apotheosis of Washington. From somewhere above celestial gowers, an inch below the dome, the rays of 6 etheric powers brought forth the new Rome. She was conceived by sun and moon, and carried in Air's belly, till George he sighted her all hewn anew from primal jelly. The gods emerged from Sol's estate, they took the form of ravens, to sing of Columbia's lively fate construed through 13 maidens. 'Tis true he was the word aglow, that man was a begetter, who rose from Tartarus below, in robes of pure magenta. At noon the trickster comes, the light, the first of cogitations, to teach the colonists the plight and joys of transmutation. Among his gifts a bag of gold, of saffron and of nectar, to outwit cunning of the redcoat mould, and act as chief deflector. At 2 the fire it came threefold within the blacksmith's forges. It melted metals and glass so old, amassed from mainland gorges. The god appeared, he said, "Look deep inside your church-filled mother, for there hides powder in a heap your enemies to smother." "No, wait," the queen of wheat will say, "your strength is in your tummy, so hasten and traverse that lay which renders men all rummy. Take from my flat plains plant and weed, my flowers of deep fuchsia, ferment its pollen into mead, to halt your men's inertia. At 6 the tulpa springs to life, to fight for liberation. They've had enough of being at strife with British dispensation. She'll spring atop old George's head, her jewels of war all styled, in blue and stripes of white and red. Behold the favourite child. A few doors down some sons of earth catch glimpse of an infusion. In trial and error they'll find what's worth to mimic in profusion. Athena spoke to them that night, as dove, as white Maria. She warns that gadgets suffer plight without Trinosophia. From deep within the sea they come, with chariots and horses, all wet and draped in weeds become, then spew forth shapeless forces. The Malian leads the foam-born herd, as does the god of fire. They swim along the flood unheard, and bind the sea's empire. At 12 that man, he leaves from home, bedecked in mason's gear, to lay the cornerstone on loam beneath the virgin's bile. The immortals gather at his helm, with wands and magic rods. Anon they'll rise to the newer realm, to ruminate with star gods. And on that note, I will speak to you next time for another vlog. Thank you.